there, my adventure photographers. Today we are going to, that was a bee right in the shot. Did you see it? Welcome to Rifle Falls State Park. Now today we are going to be doing something very, very fun, and I'm going to be teaching you how to very quickly, as a beginner, shoot waterfalls. I'm going to be briefly touching on how to do that freeze frame waterfall and capture every single droplet, but I'm going to be more talking about how to do those nice, flowy, long exposure waterfall shots on a camera that, let's be honest, everyone prefers. And if you stick around till the end, I will be telling you how to do this quickly with a phone, just in case you do not have a camera. So stay tuned, let's get started. So before we get started, I am going to be talking about some essential gear that you are going to need to capture those waterfalls. The first one, that is probably the most important, is a tripod. You are going to need these for those long exposure shots. I will say that it's very important for you to have a sturdy one, and it's also very important for you to have one that you can easily go and frame your shot. I actually tried this with an Amazon Basics tripod the other day, and I ended up just like hating my life. So I will not be using that again. I will be using the expensive, sturdy, very bulky tripod from now on. Lesson learned. Another thing I like about this tripod is that you don't directly screw the camera in, which can get old if you're switching from tripod to handheld. It just has this little tiny adapter on the bottom, and then you just basically put it in to the top. So another thing that you might want to consider getting is also a remote shutter. Kind of looks like this. However, I personally prefer to have the least amount of gear possible when I am adventuring, especially if I am hiking. So I'm going to show you an alternative to this. And another thing to keep in mind just to bring is I also have some waterproof plastic bags and just like a little shower cap just in case I need to protect my camera from the waterfall spray when I'm moving around. You can also just drape a microfiber cloth over the camera when you aren't shooting. If you are interested, I will link all of these things in the description if you need any of these things. So there's a couple settings that we do need to understand. Now, the most important one is going to be shutter speed, and this is going to be crucial for waterfall photography. Now, your shutter in your camera basically just goes to take a photo. And if you do it quick, it's going to capture very, very little details very fast. And however, if it goes and stays open, it is going to capture everything. As long as that shutter is open, it is going to capture everything in that moment, including water falling. So because the shutter is open, that's what creates those really cool long exposure shots that you see on people's walls and in Nat Geo. So depending on what style of waterfall you want, that is going to determine your shutter speed. Now, just some other quick terms, we're not going to be focusing on them a lot. However, aperture is how much light is hitting your camera sensor. So if you're letting a lot of light in, that's going to be a lower f-stop number, like an f2.8, an f4. Yeah, that's going to let a lot of light into your picture. If it's like f22, that's going to close it up and not let a lot of light into your camera. Normally, this has to do with how blurry the background is. We're not going to be focusing on it a lot, but you might need it later in order to compensate for the light, depending on what you set your shutter speed to, if that makes sense. And then your ISO basically just bumps up the lead on the photo. It is very important that in these bright waterfall situations, we want the ISO to be as least as possible, because if you turn up the ISO on your photo has a tendency to become grainy and have noise. So since we're having a lot of light in this photo, especially with those long exposure shots, we're letting a lot of light in there, we do not want that ISO to be very high. So we're going to put it to the lowest amount possible. If you have any other questions on these golden triangle settings of photography, I do have a free photography cheat sheet that you can download that explains it a lot better probably than I'm doing now. With those settings basically understood, let's get into what settings we do for each type of waterfall photography. Okay, so first we are going to quickly go over how to get literally every single droplet in focus for that freeze frame waterfall shot. Now, the easiest way to do both of these is actually going to be in shutter priority. That's going to be the best for beginners. If you do feel like stepping up to manual, I will talk about it just a little bit, but let's start in shutter priority. First things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my shot with the tripod, and I'm going to secure it with the tripod. I'm going to go to shutter priority. I operate with a Canon, so this is going to be TD. Don't ask me why it's TD. And then on here, I'm going to adjust my shutter, and it's basically going to adjust everything else for me. It means that the shutter is going to close very, very quickly. Most people like to do at least 1/500th of a second. If we're doing something that is this fast, I actually prefer to go more towards 1/1000th of a second. So here's all my settings in that aperture priority mode. I'm actually already set at 1/1000th of a second. If I want to, there's 500. I would probably start maybe around like 500, work your way up, see what actually captures that shot. I'm going to capture this, and as you can see, pretty much every single little detail of that waterfall is in motion. So if we are in manual mode here, I'm going to adjust my shutter speed first to maybe around 1,000, and I'm going to keep an eye on my light meter here. If I do auto ISO, it's going to bump it up a little bit since that shutter is so fast. It's going to need to maybe compensate for some light. I'll probably open up my aperture quite a bit. If I am doing that, I'm just going to look and just kind of see where I like it. Maybe 200. Okay, that's a little dark. Okay, so let's try that. So if you wanted to get a little bit more control, that is how you could do it with manual, and just play with your settings until you are happy. So now let's talk about the one that everybody cares about, which is that stunning long exposure flow waterfall photography. I actually did a poll and asked people if they liked the freeze or the flow, and majority flow won. And of course, that means it's way harder to achieve. So for beginners, if you are starting, as I said, I would recommend starting on shutter priority mode, that's TV. So again, if I'm on TV, we are going to be doing the opposite of what we were doing before. So we are going to be opening that shutter, we are going to be letting a ton of light in, and we are going to be getting those beautiful waterfall streaks. So if we are on aperture priority, the golden spot, I think it really depends on the photographer. Now, as you can see, it's a little overexposed, which is why you might need to go into manual mode. Now, here's the important thing. If I push the shutter, me pushing the shutter is going to slightly move the camera. So this is where that remote shutter is going to come in handy. Or if you don't have a remote shutter, I'm going to teach you a little trick. If you go to this queue right here, there's this thing called drive mode. And it's this box right here, and basically this is where you would go to like burst a photo for wildlife photography. But also, if you go on there, there is this thing, and it's like a 2-second little timer. So if I push this, wait 2 seconds, 1, 2, and then it's going to take the picture. If you do want more control, which I would suggest going to manual mode. And with this, it can be a little tricky. So if we're here in manual, as I said, I'm going to adjust my shutter speed first. Maybe we'll go to about 8. And then the problem with this is that it's really bright. The ISO, I would honestly set it to the lowest that you possibly can because we want 0 grain and we're already letting in so much light, so we really don't need it. So I just set it to the lowest it possibly is. And then with the aperture, we do have to compensate because we're letting so much light into here. You might need to adjust your f-stop. Now, normally, the less it is, so like I'm at f22 right now, you might want to go a little bit less just depending on your style. See, now it's just right a little bit over. So you might need to go either up a little bit until that light meter right here is good. You can also check out a histogram. So if you go to this info button, here's the histogram right here. So there's a lot of stuff on the low. There's some stuff over here, but you can kind of adjust your settings just a little bit. So see, that is really bumping up the low ends of the photograph. If you go kind of over there, it's more even, but I kind of like the shadows and the highlights in there. So it really is personal preference of what you want in the photograph. I'm also shooting in RAW, as you can see right there. So I can maybe in post come in and maybe bring out these highlights just a little bit more. But again, it's personal preference for the photographer. And I'm also set to be on a 2-second timer. So I'm gonna go 1, leave it alone. And then it creates those really long exposure waterfalls for you. So let's say you are hiking for miles and miles and miles to get to a waterfall and you do not have a tripod. Just a quick little tip that is not perfect, but it has worked for me in the past, is if you can find something sturdy like a railing or a branch or a tree or a rock, what I would actually do is take your hand or one finger and use it to support the lens, and then put your finger on so that you are supporting it, but the lens isn't actually hitting the thing, you know. Then support yourself. Maybe use your other finger, maybe your pinky, to support the body of the camera as well. A nice deep breath in, and then click the shutter, wait for it, and then let it out. So those are the basics of basically how to get those long exposure shots with photography. Now, a quick caveat, you might need to adjust your settings just based on where you are and how much light you have available. You might have too much light. You might need to bring up that shutter speed just a little bit to compensate, if that makes sense. Or if you want like a wider aperture, you might need to compensate a little bit. The whole point in this is that start with these settings and then adjust them to how you like the photograph, adjust them to how your camera works, and just go from there. Okay, so now that you made it to the end, if you don't have a camera, do not panic. If you are going on a long trek and you don't want to haul all of this camera gear and the tripod up here, do not panic. There is a quick way to do this on the iPhone. Now, quick caveat, it is not going to be as clear or as crisp as the camera. However, in a pinch, it will do. And I'm so sorry, Android users, I do not know how to do this on an Android. Someone can comment. I only use iPhone. I'm very sorry. Basically, what you're gonna do is you're gonna open your camera app on your iPhone. You're going to make sure that the live is on, and then you're going to line up your shot and you're gonna take the picture. Now, what I would recommend is it does crop it a little bit. So when you are framing your picture, you're going to go a little bit back just so you give room enough for the crop. So once you get your photo, you're actually going to go into your photo app after you take the photo, and there's going to be a little icon in the top left corner. It's going to say live with a little arrow to the right of it. You're going to click that arrow and you're going to hit long exposure. Now it's going to think about it for a hot minute, and then it's going to crop it a little bit and you're going to see these nice long exposure waterfalls. Now again, this is not as crisp or clear as a camera and you don't have that much control, but it will do in a pinch. So that is all for my beginner guide for how to photograph waterfalls, both still and flow. And I want to hear, was this helpful for you? Do you have any other tips and tricks for photographing waterfalls? I want to hear from you what you think. And most importantly, I do want to see your photos. I'm like the biggest adventure and photographer cheerleader. So if you feel safe sharing your photos, I would love to see your waterfall photography. If this video was helpful for you, it would mean the world to this traveling mermaid if you would just hit the dislike and subscribe button, just so that I can keep bringing you free adventure and photography content. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Stay adventurous and keep photographing.